And why do you think you're being followed, Mr. Mossman?
I don't think, Lieutenant. I know. They won't even listen to me downstairs.
I will. Try me. Sit down. You said that you had some information about a homicide.
Mine. I'm going to be killed.
By the man who was following you? Do you know who he was?
No. I didn't see his face. Could have been anybody. What I mean is, could have been any one of 7 or 8 people. You see, 3 years ago, I served on a grand jury. I got sick when I had to quit, but before I did, I voted to indict at least 7 or 8 people. Most of them went to prison. Some didn't. Robbers, murderers, rapists. Any one of them could be after me.
Why you?
Because I was tough on them. With all that's happening on the streets today, somebody's got to be tough on them. And I asked them questions, and I trapped them in lies, and the DA himself congratulated me afterwards, said I was responsible for at least half a dozen indictments.
Mr. Mossman did serve on a grand jury for 8 weeks.
Why didn't you believe me?
We have to check these things out.
Everybody said it was my duty to serve on the grand jury. Said I believed them like a fool. You see what's happened?
Were you ever threatened before?
Well, sure. What, do you think I'm crazy? It's happened before. It happened 2 weeks ago. And what about the anonymous phone calls I get? I get threats at home. Scared my wife half to death.
Did you tell these things to the police?
Sure.
What happened?
What do you think happened? Nothing happened. Nothing happened. They tell me I should get an unlisted phone. Okay, I got an unlisted phone. I keep getting the calls. They keep coming. I need protection.
All right. All right, Dan. Get in touch with the DA's office. I want a list of all the people who were indicted while Mr. Mossman served. We're going to check them all out.
No, that's going to take days, weeks. What's going to happen in the meantime?
I'll do everything I can. I'll try to get a man out there as soon as I can. Check it out from time to time.
Oh, okay. I understand now. You've got to have a homicide before you can do anything. Okay. Lieutenant, this case ought to be a cinch for you because you're getting advance information on the Alfred C. Mossman murder right now, and that ought to save you people a lot of trouble.
Hello? Hello? Look, is somebody there? Will you please answer?
Hi, honey.
Oh, hi, dear.
Was that call for me?
No.
Well, who was it then?
The school. They wanted to know why Bonnie's been absent so long.
Well, you told them she wasn't feeling good, didn't you?
Yes, of course I did.
I'm feeling good, Daddy. Want to see my dollhouse?
What happened downtown?
Oh, golly, will you look at that? Oh, Pumpkin, that's fine. That's just fine.
Will you help me put the bars on the windows?
Oh, Pumpkin, dollhouses don't need bars.
Then why does our house need bars?
Because we're going to get you a dog.
A dog?
A big dog, and we've got to have the bars on the windows so the dog doesn't run away.
When?
That's what Mama and I want to talk about now. So you run your room and play, and then we'll talk about it later, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah!
police gonna do?
The same. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They act as if there's something wrong with me.
The homeowners association called this morning. The man was very rude.
Why?
He claims that our fence and the bars are gonna lower property values in the neighborhood.
What's the matter with him? Okay, maybe he doesn't know about our problem, but doesn't he know that Coogan's house last week was broken into, and the week before that, 2 blocks down, O'Reilly's house was broken into? Didn't he read the papers this morning on over a dozen muggings on the street last night? That's what driving property values down around here.
Al, then let's sell the house. And we'll move out of here before it's too late.
No, honey. Take months to get rid of this place and then try to close on the escrow. No, we're trapped right here. We're gonna have to defend ourselves as best we can.
When did you get that?
Today. And whoever it was is gonna get the surprise of his life.
Dinner will be ready in half an hour.
Did you get a rundown on those cases?
Yep. There were 11 indictments while he was on jury. 2 were dismissed, 4 got suspended sentences, and 2 were found not guilty.
Well, that leaves 3.
James Dunbar, Frank Herrick, and Roger Corigliano were still in prison. The other 2 are out on parole.
Well, what kind of jacket's on them?
Heavy. Herrick did 3.5 out of a 10-year stretch, second-degree murder. Guy's got a long history of violence. A dozen assaults, mostly barroom brawls.
Big guy, 6'3", 200 pounds. According to this, he was a model prisoner, got time off for good behavior.
Yeah, well, the word is he threatened to get back at Mossman during the trial.
Well, 3 years of prison could have taken a lot of steam out of that threat. What about the other guy?
Dunbar did 2 years voluntary manslaughter. Got a long list of priors, too.
Yeah, it looks it. Okay, I'll take him and you take Herrick and see where he was this morning.
Right.
Oh, Jim. Jim, I want you to take a stakeout tonight, 8 to 12. I know, it's a double shift.
Well, it's not that, Lieutenant, but I had something planned with the wife.
The wife? Oh, I forgot. You've only been handcuffed for a month.
Well, there'll be other nights. She knows how hard I buck to get on this squad.
Mrs. Herrick?
Welcome to the sauna. Hope you're selling ice cubes.
No, I'm Inspector Robbins, police.
What's that man done now?
I'd like to talk to your husband.
Oh, I wouldn't. We've been separated for a month now. That's not counting the 3 years vacation he had in state.
You haven't seen him in that time?
Nope. And it's been great. Excuse me. I don't know, every so often he calls me from a bar. But I am not going to be a punching bag for Mr. Golden Gloves ever again.
Do you have any idea where he's living?
No. I don't know, last I heard he was bunking in one of those apartments that you rent by the week. But don't ask me the name of it because Frank was too blotted to pronounce it right.
Tell me, does he have any friends or relatives living in the Bay Area?
He lost all of his friends a long time ago. Including me.
Thank you.
Inspector. Frank usually hangs out at a bar on Turk Street. I don't know, you might be able to find him there. But if you do, don't you tell him that I told you.
It's a promise. Thank you.
Watch this, Bonnie. Watch. Left to lock. Right to unlock. Left to lock. Right to unlock. Left to lock. Right to unlock. Okay?
That way to lock. That way to not lock.
Unlock. Yeah, but now what's the most important thing of all?
If I'm here alone, Don't open the door to anybody except you and Mommy.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right, baby. That's good. Going to bed now. Hello? 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 No one answers. Who is this? Who's talking? Hello?
Al, hang up. It's probably a wrong number.
Oh, no, honey. I can hear somebody breathing.
Well, maybe something's wrong with the phone.
No. He's doing it deliberately. Honey, come here.
What?
Come here. Come here. I want to teach you to load this thing and fire it.
No. Oh, no, please, Al. You know I hate guns.
Come on, you've
no,
got to learn.
I'm
Baby,
afraid
you've
of
got
guns.
to learn. What if I'm at work? Now listen, it's easy. You take the bullet. You put it in like that, see? Okay, pull the trigger.
Pull the
Take the
trigger.
gun, pull the trigger. It's not loaded, pull the trigger. Don't pull it. Pull the trigger.
No, I can't.
Pull the trigger.
Al, I just
Pull the trigger! Pull the trigger!
When he stepped to a city fair. I don't want another drink. I just want some telephone change. You don't mind taking a drink. Look.
Hello?
Hey, Beth. Hey, honey. Honey, it's Frank. I want to come home, sweetheart. Huh? Come on, Beth. Come on. Don't start that wagging your tongue at me again. Come on, it's my pet, isn't it?
Not anymore. Why don't you just go home and sleep it off?
Come on, Beth. Come on. You know you're my home. You know that, don't you? Hey, honey. Remember the good times we used to have, huh?
Listen, you. The cops were here today looking for you. Remember your probation? You show your face, and I'll sick 'em on you, so help me.
Now, listen, Beth, you can't talk to me like that. I'm still your husband.
Not anymore. I'm filing for divorce.
Yeah, divorce. Teach you about divorce and have some respect for people.
All right, let me through. Okay, give it to me, Bernie.
One shot, it went clean through. They're still looking for the slug.
Any sign of a struggle?
No.
The position of the body was facing the house. Can you give us an approximate time?
11:47. The owner of the house called it in seconds after it happened.
Mr. Mossman was an eyewitness?
Uh-huh. But we haven't been able to get much out of him. Maybe it's a shock, but he doesn't seem to be able to talk about it.
He'll talk to me. Anything else?
Homer never got his gun out of the holster. He came up that driveway with nothing but a flashlight in his hand.
Well, they say the young ones are trigger happy. I want pictures and everything else you've got by tonight.
They got the word.
Come on, Daniel. You with me?
Yeah.
Nothing, Lieutenant.
Are you all right, Mr. Mossman?
I told you this was going to happen. You wouldn't believe me.
What did you see?
I don't feel very well.
Well, you reported a murder and you said you saw the killer. What was he like? Well, now, we need the information now, Mr. Mossman.
I'm gonna check on Bonnie. Excuse me.
Was he, like one of these two?
Yeah, that's the one. It's him.
Frank Herrick. You're sure?
Positive.
Did you see the actual shooting?
No. I heard the shots. I would turn on the outside lights. Herrick, he ran back across the street. I came to get my gun. When I got there, he was gone.
Mr. Mossman, you last saw Frank Herrick more than 3 years ago. You remember him that well?
Yes, he's an animal. He killed a man in a bar. He beat a man to death. He was him. He was following me.
What was he wearing?
A brown suit and no tie and no hat and a white shirt and dark shoes.
You saw Herrick running across the street, away from you. How'd you see the shirt?
Collar.
You're certain he didn't have a tie?
His collar was flattened out on his jacket, sports style. I'm an upholsterer. Cloth is my business.
And your wife didn't see him?
No, my wife was asleep.
What were you doing up?
Was checking the doors and the windows. I check them every night.
Lieutenant? Found it in the gutter, Lieutenant.
9mm, huh? Could be a Walther Luger or, well, a half a dozen other American makes. Get it delivered.
Lab crew get any footprints?
Negative. Nothing else to go on, but I got them to vacuum the lawn and the driveway anyway.
I'll see you at the station.
Mr. Mossman, what caliber is your gun?
.357 Magnum. It's brand new. Let me show you. See, it's brand new. It's never been fired.
Did you see Herrick's gun?
I can't tell one gun from another. Upholstery, I know. This is the first gun I've ever owned.
That's all for now, Mr. Mossman. But we'll need you down at headquarters to sign a statement and then later to look at a lineup.
Face to face?
Well, I understand how you feel, but Inspector William Homer put his life on the line for you. And without your full cooperation, his killer could go free. Now, you wouldn't want that, would you?
No.
Goodbye.
Why did you tell them you only had one gun?
I don't want them suspecting me. I forgot to mention about the other gun. I don't want to answer any more questions. Don't you see the way they look at me? They look at me like I'm some kind of a coward. I don't run out there and start a gunfight.
I know you're not afraid, Al. You were just thinking of your family.
Do you think these guys care about these cops?
Where did Herrick's wife say we might find him?
One of the bars on Turk Street.
Yeah, we'll do that first thing in the morning.
Alfred, what are you doing to my material? What are you doing?
I'm sorry, Mr. Ebanjan. This morning I can't think straight.
I told you not to worry your head. The police will find that murder. Don't worry about it. And a cop killer? They never let a cop killer get away. Never. From the tiniest little piece of hair or lint, they've got a clue. That's the way they get 'em.
I have to go home now, Mr. I don't feel well.
Please, Alfred. We've got this couch we promised, and we've got the love seat we promised. We've got to get him out. Think it over, please, Alfred.
Quiet! I gotta go home now.
You Frank Herrick?
Hey, what's your hang-up?
We're the police. We'd like you to come along with us.
That'll be the day.
You don't want any trouble, Mr. Herrick.
I don't want any trouble either.
Take him that way.
I never had a gun, and I sure never shot any cop.
Then tell us the truth about last night, where you went, who you were with.
Oh, I told you 100 times. I was drinking everything that was poured. I called my wife, and she asked for a divorce.
At approximately 10 o'clock, what bars did you go to after that?
Well, I don't remember after that. I remember I slept in my car, and when I woke up, it was dawn. So I just waited until the Garnett Bar and Grill opened.
Where'd you put the gun?
I get into enough trouble with my fist alone. What do I need a gun for?
You do admit threatening Al Mossman's life, right?
Oh, so I threatened his life. So what? I mean, because I got sent to prison. I threatened everybody's life, the grand jury, the DA. It's just talk.
Oh, wait now. When did you change your clothes?
Who changed? I've been in these same clothes, waking and sleeping for the last 3 days.
Just doesn't figure. Take a look at Mossman's description of his clothes.
Brown suit, white shirt, dark shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And Mossman said his business was cloth?
That's right. Bring him in here. Mr. Mossman, come on. I want you to take a good look at his clothes.
Yes, sir.
How could you describe his jacket and pants as being brown?
I may have made a mistake about the clothes, but not about his face. I saw Herrick that night. He killed the inspector.
You're lying!
You did! Yes, you did! You did! You did! You killed him! You made those threatening phone calls to my house. You asked my wife. You did! You killed him!
Sekulovich! Book him.
I tell you what, we'll split an ice cream bar and save the other one for your father.
Okay.
Bonnie, did you leave one of your toys in here?
No, Mommy.
negative. What did you get?
3 propositions, 2 from women.
Well, lucky you. What have I got here? 11 down and 9 to go.
You really think this is worth it?
Do I think what's worth it?
Working our tails off trying to alibi someone who shot a policeman.
Listen, young fella, when the DA gets this case, it's not only going to be tight, it's going to be hermetically sealed. And that's the least we can do for Holmer. Now let's cover the 1400 block.
Hello? No, Mr. Abagian. He stepped out. Of course, I'll have him call the minute he gets back. Goodbye. That's the 3rd time he's called. You're gonna lose your job. Al, what's the matter? They have the man in jail. We don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm taking Bonnie to school tomorrow. Let's go to the park. Huh? Just the 3 of us. We'll have a picnic. It's been such a long time.
I don't know what's happening to me, Carol. I can't work. This morning I ruined another piece of material, $20 a yard. Lately, everybody keeps staring at me. Mr. Abagian, the police, everybody.
Is it because of this? Why did you hide it and lie to the police?
I forgot to tell them when they questioned me. The paper said it was a Luger that killed that inspector. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me.
Al, you lied to me. You told me you traded in the Luger.
I was afraid you'd let it slip, and then they wouldn't believe me about Herrick. The police have doubted me about him from the very beginning. Carol, I'm so afraid of everything, even of losing my job.
Oh, no, Al. No, you're not afraid of working. You know, some men are. Lots of men run from raising families. But you're not afraid of that. Oh, Al, I love you for that, too. I tell you what, we are gonna go on that picnic. I'm gonna get some delicatessen beef, thinly sliced, the way you like it, and maybe even some beer. It'll do us good to get out in the fresh air, Al. Al?
That's him, huh? You're sure that's him?
Sure, I'm sure. He tried to pick a fight with me about the parking fee. See, I even wrote down his license number just in case he came back, you know?
Bartender remembers him, Mike. Says he left about 1.
Time and date stamped on the back there.
In 11:04 p.m., out 12:50 a.m. Bartender said he was there during all that time?
Never left.
I would have recognized him if he came out. You can't miss that dude.
Okay, here you are, son. Thanks.
Well, that cuts it. Herrick couldn't have shot Homer. Which means Mossman was mistaken. Or lied. What do you have on the other con, Dunbar?
Well, Dunbar's been in Texas for over 2 months. That means I'll have to get Herrick out of custody. I want you to get me everything you can on Mossman. What he had for breakfast, the kind of upholstery tax he uses, everything. Now, come on, let's go.
door in the middle of the afternoon?
Call the DA's office. They let him out.
Harry?
They let him out. They don't care. They let a murderer walk the streets.
Don't worry, I'll get it. It's probably Mr. Apache.
I'm not going to go to work. I won't go to work.
Hello? Hello? Mr. Abagian? Is that you? Hello?
Listen to me, you animal. You're not scaring me anymore. I won't be threatened anymore.
You asked for it, Mossman. The animal's gonna get you.
Here's 2 more complaints of night prowlers.
2 more, huh? That's 6 times Mossman reported that he was being followed by hired killers, and each time in a different precinct.
Look at those dates. All those complaints were made while Herrick was in state prison.
Yeah, he was so frightened that night, he'd say anything to pin it on Herrick.
That's more than fear, this paranoia. You know, he might even believe he saw Herrick. This guy could be a little psycho.
Psycho enough to kill a cop? Well, now, why didn't you tell us that you were being followed for a long time?
What good would it have done?
A registration file showed that you bought a .357 Magnum very recently, on the 19th.
Any law against that?
No, there isn't. But we were wondering, since you were followed for, well, over 2 years, why you didn't buy a gun before. Unless you already owned one.
According to your records, you were in the peacetime army station in West Germany. You didn't pick up a 9mm Luger while you were there, did you?
Why do you question me as if I was a criminal? I'm a victim. You let a murderer go. Already he's calling me with threats.
Oh, no, wait a minute now. Didn't you say that you had an unlisted telephone number?
Herrick used to work for the telephone company. How hard would it be for him to get my number?
According to Herrick's record, he did work for the phone company as a lineman.
He did, huh?
Every time I make a statement, you two look at each other. Don't you ever believe me?
It's true. Herrick hung up on me dozens of times.
Well, we'll check it out. But, you know, you still haven't answered our question. Did you ever own a Luger?
No, of course not. I wouldn't even know what one looked like.
Aren't you going to answer it?
It's him. It's Harry.
Hello? Hello?
I'm coming to get you.
Well, I can't hear you. You'll have to speak louder.
I'm coming to get you.
Well, now, why would you want to come to get me? Hello? Hello?
Now do you believe us?
When he calls again, you answer the phone. Stall him as long as you can. Say anything at all, just to keep him on that phone. We're going to put a tracer on it.
It's gonna be different, Beth. I swear I haven't had a single drink. Honey, I want what we had years ago.
It's too late, Frank. Way too late.
Come on, let me in. We can talk this out. I know we can.
I read the papers, you know. You were arrested again.
How's that Mossman? He lied about me.
Sure, Frank. Sure.
I'm telling you, Mossman is trying to frame me.
It's always somebody else's fault, isn't it?
Damn it, that little wart. If I see him again, I'll put a stop to it this time.
Yeah, well, you just do that, Frank.
Beth, I mean it. I'll stop him.
Okay, the court order's delivered and the tap is set. He said with the new equipment, they can make a positive trace in milliseconds, providing it's a local call and the monitor set up in advance.
Well, let's hope we luck out.
Why your sister? She's safer here.
I just want Bonnie out of the house for a while.
But I don't want you to go outside. It's dangerous out there.
Al, you need help. Medical help.
No, you say you want to have a picnic? All right, we're going to have a picnic right here. You and me and the pumpkin, we're going to have a picnic right here. I'll spread the blanket down on the floor, and then you can make the potato salad.
Al,
We'll
for
have the
God's
picnic.
sakes, will you listen to me? Don't you understand? I don't want her to see you falling apart like this.
Stop it. Stop it. You hear me? me! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! I'm gonna kill you, Herrick. You come around here, I'm gonna blow your brains out. You say you're waiting for me, now I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you. You come get me.
Inspectors 8-1. Inspectors 8-1.
Inspectors 8-1.
We have your phone trace at the corner of 20th and Wisconsin. A payphone.
Okay, 10-4. Let's go.
Hey, Mossman. 20 guns ain't gonna save you, Mossman. I'm coming to get you.
He'll be through in a minute.
I think you're through right now.
We weren't doing anything.
Let me have your school IDs. How did you get Mossman's unlisted telephone number?
Who's Mossman?
Don't give me that. Now, how did you get the number?
I deliver groceries at the Fortress. I sneaked a look at the kitchen phone. We were only having a little fun, Lieutenant.
Tormenting a sick man is your idea of having fun? Well, let me tell you something. Using a public telephone to threaten a man's life is a criminal violation.
Hey, I didn't threaten anybody. I mean, all I did was call up a couple of times and
Don't you tell me, buddy. I was at the other end of that phone.
Mike, it's our call.
Okay.
We won't do it anymore.
I know you won't. Your parents will have to come down tomorrow and pick these up at juvenile.
Mike, it's Mossman's house. Neighbor called emergency code 2.
Let's go.
Up and up, Mossman!
Al, what are you doing?
Up and up, Mossman!
Al, call the police!
I know you're in there!
Get in your room. Get in your room right now and stay there.
Come on, or I'll boot it in!
Al! Will you call the police? Stop it! You stop it!
He's trying to kill me!
Send a special force unit out here, code 3. Take the back here.
Al, for God's sakes, you don't know what you're doing. Al, will you listen to me, please? Don't!
You have a bullhorn. Mossman, this is Lieutenant Stone. Throw out the gun. Come out with your hands up. You hear me? We don't want to fire on the house.
I see you, Herrick. How does it feel to be afraid?
You can keep him talking. I can work my way around to the back of the
You
house.
stay right where you are. He's got bars on the back windows, too. Mossman, you don't want to endanger your wife and child, do you?
Lieutenant! You hear me? I I'm not afraid any longer!
Ready with the tear gas? Wait for my word.
Mossman, in 10 seconds, we're going to fire tear gas. Come on out with your hands up. Throw out the gun.
Now, can you lob that on the porch? Go ahead. Mossman, the next one's coming through the window. Come on out with your hands up.
No, you don't know there's a killer outside!
No. Oh, no. Not anybody outside. The killer's in here. Can't you see, Al? It's you. It's your fear that's killing everyone. Well, you want to destroy us too, Bonnie and me? Well, go ahead. You get it over with right now. Go on. You use your guns on us now. Go on, Al.
Okay, drop it! All right, come on. Trespassing, threatening a man's life.
I only want to talk to him.
Yeah, I know how you wanted to talk to him. By climbing over a locked gate.
Right to lock, left to not lock, Daddy.
Thank you, Pumpkin. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I had trouble with the locks.
Would you like to come in? Have some coffee?
No, thank you.
I'm so sorry about everything.
And so are we.
Will he still have to serve a prison term? I mean, later?
That's up to the courts, Mrs. Mossman.
They'll do everything they can for him.
That's good. Good. You know, I was watching him when the judge told him he was being transferred to the mental health unit at the hospital, and he didn't bat an eye. He seemed to understand that it was for his own good.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Thank you so much for letting me come with you. I don't think I could have gone down there alone. Goodbye.
Yeah, it looks much better, doesn't it?
Yeah, a lot. You know what they call that?
No, what?
Locked door syndrome. It's happening all over.
Yeah, well, Mossman didn't invent it. He caught it right here in the city. Right in the streets. It's a virus called fear.
Yeah, well, they better find something to fight it before every home becomes a fortress.
San Francisco always looked like a promise from a distance, a city rising out of fog and water, like an idea that had decided to become real. But from street level it was something else entirely, a maze of damp alleys, steep inclines, tired buildings clinging to hillsides like old men refusing to let go. And on a gray morning in early autumn, Lieutenant Mike Stone stood at the edge of Broadway watching the city wake up with the practiced suspicion of a man who had learned that beauty and danger here often shared the same address, the fog rolling low and slow between buildings as if it had business of its own, the kind of fog that swallowed sound and made every footstep feel louder than it should, every silence heavier, and somewhere below him a cable car bell rang with a cheerfulness that felt almost obscene considering the call that had dragged him out of bed before dawn. A body found near an abandoned Victorian house perched on the edge of Russian Hill, a place locals called the Castle because of its turrets and stone facade, a relic from another century that had long since stopped pretending it belonged to the present, and Stone adjusted his jacket against the cold, thinking not for the first time that San Francisco had a talent for turning nostalgia into a weapon, making the past feel close enough to touch and sharp enough to cut. The castle of fear loomed above the street when he reached it, its windows dark, its iron gate hanging crooked on rusted hinges, and for a moment Stone felt the familiar tightening in his chest that always came when a case promised more questions than answers, because houses like this were never just houses, they were containers, holding secrets the way lungs held smoke, and the smell hit him before he even crossed the police tape. A damp rot mixed with old wood and something metallic. Underneath, the unmistakable signature of violence that no amount of sea air could ever completely erase. Inspector Steve Heller was already there, tall, intense, moving with the restless energy of a man who thought faster than he spoke, his eyes scanning the facade as if the house itself might suddenly confess, and when he saw Stone his mouth tightened into the hint of a smile that never quite reached his eyes, the look of a partner who trusted you but never stopped measuring the distance between theory and reality. "You ever notice," Heller said without preamble, "how places like this always look like they're watching you back?" And Stone followed his gaze up to the highest turret, where a single broken window stared down at them like a blind eye, and he shrugged, because in his experience buildings didn't watch people, people watched each other, and that was where the trouble always started. The body was inside, just past the threshold, a man in his late 40s by the look of him, dressed in a threadbare coat that had once been expensive, his face slack in death, eyes half open as if surprised by the outcome, and Stone knelt beside him, noting the bruising around the neck, the careful way the killer had applied pressure, professional enough to know where to squeeze, patient enough to wait, and careless enough to leave him here. And that contradiction settled into Stone's mind like a splinter, because killers who were careful rarely chose theatrical locations unless they wanted to be seen. Heller crouched opposite him, already narrating possibilities, his voice low, almost reverent, as if the house demanded respect, pointing out the lack of defensive wounds, the absence of obvious theft, the deliberate positioning of the body beneath a stained glass window depicting some medieval scene of knights and towers, and Stone listened, letting the details stack up, knowing that sooner or later one of them would tip and reveal the shape of the truth hiding underneath, but not yet not. Here, not while the fog still clung to the walls like a second skin. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors drawn by sirens and curiosity, faces pale and expectant, and among them Stone noticed a woman standing slightly apart, her coat buttoned too tightly, her eyes fixed not on the house but on the officers themselves, watching the watchers, and when their eyes met she looked away too quickly, a small movement, easy to miss. But Stone had built a career on noticing things people thought were invisible, and he filed her away without comment. The victim's identification came from his wallet, a name that carried weight in certain circles, Arthur Kellerman, a real estate developer whose recent projects had been as controversial as they were ambitious, a man who had made enemies by turning old neighborhoods into investment opportunities, and as Stone straightened up, he felt the first real tug of the case, the sense that this wasn't just about a dead man in a creepy house. It was about the city itself, about who got to decide what San Francisco remembered and what it erased, and the Castle of Fear suddenly felt less like a random crime scene and more like a statement. As the coroner's team moved in, Stone and Heller stepped back, trading a look that needed no explanation. The kind of look forged over years of shared instincts and disagreements, and Stone knew Heller was already constructing a map in his head, lines connecting Kellerman to the house, to the neighborhood, to anyone who might have benefited from his silence, while Stone's own thoughts drifted in a different direction, toward the house itself, toward the way some places seemed to absorb human intentions and reflect them back distorted, amplified, and he wondered who had chosen this location and why. Later, as they walked the perimeter, Heller talked about Kellerman's latest project, a plan to convert a row of historic homes into luxury apartments, a plan that had been stalled by protests and lawsuits, and Stone listened, thinking about the woman in the crowd, about the careful hands that had ended Kellerman's life, about the way the castle stood like a stubborn monument to a past that refused to be renovated, and the pieces began to suggest a pattern that was less about money and more about fear, fear of loss, fear of change, fear of being erased. And Stone knew from experience that fear was the most dangerous motive of all because it made ordinary people do extraordinary things. By the time they left the scene, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the city in fragments, sun breaking through in narrow shafts that illuminated patches of pavement and brick, and as Stone drove back toward headquarters, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. The knowledge that somewhere in this city someone believed they had restored balance by killing a man, and it was his job to prove them wrong, to show that violence never resolved anything, it only built. Another room in the castle, another dark corridor where fear could hide and wait. At his desk, with a cup of bad coffee cooling beside him, Stone reviewed Kellerman's file, the complaints, the threats, the anonymous letters filled with language that swung wildly between civic pride and outright menace, and he could almost hear the voices behind them, residents who felt trapped, who saw their city slipping away one permit at a time, and he wondered how thin the line was between righteous anger and murder, how easily one could become the other when given the right stage, the right symbolism, the right target. Heller stopped by later, dropping a thin folder onto Stone's desk, his expression unreadable, and said simply, "The castle isn't empty." And that was when Stone felt the case truly begin, because whatever secrets that house was holding, it was clear now that it wasn't finished telling its story, and neither were they. By the time Stone returned to the Castle of Fear that afternoon, the light had shifted in a way that made the house look less abandoned and more patient, as if it had simply been waiting for the right hour to reveal itself, the sun catching the rough stone of its facade and turning every crack and chip into a deliberate feature rather than a flaw, and he found himself slowing his steps as he crossed the threshold again. Not out of superstition, but out of respect for a place that clearly understood the value of silence. Heller was already inside, speaking quietly with a uniform who looked too young to be standing in a room like this, and Stone took in the details that had been easy to miss in the rush of the morning, the faint scuff marks on the floorboards, the way the air felt heavier the deeper you went into the house, the subtle but unmistakable sense that the walls had absorbed decades of human presence and were reluctant to let it go. "So," Stone said, keeping his voice low, "you said it wasn't empty." And Heller nodded, gesturing toward a narrow staircase that curved upward like a question mark, explaining that during a preliminary sweep they'd found signs of recent habitation on the second floor, food wrappers, cigarette butts, a makeshift bed pushed into a corner room that overlooked the bay, and Stone felt the familiar tightening of the plot. Because a house like this didn't attract casual squatters, it attracted people. With reasons, people who wanted to disappear into history or hide behind it. They climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking in protest, and Stone couldn't help thinking about Arthur Kellerman walking these same steps, maybe willingly, maybe not, his mind occupied with deals and deadlines, unaware that the house was about to claim him as part of its story. And when they reached the room Heller had mentioned, Stone paused in the doorway, taking in the careful disorder of someone trying not to be noticed. The blankets folded neatly despite their age, the empty bottles lined up against the wall like soldiers who had survived a quiet war, and on the windowsill a collection of old photographs weighed down by stones, their edges curled and faded. Stone picked one up gently, feeling the grit of decades between his fingers, and studied the image of the castle itself, taken from the street decades earlier, pristine and proud, and beside it another photograph showed a group of people standing on the front steps, smiling, arms linked, their expressions frozen in a moment of optimism that felt almost painful in its innocence. And Stone realized with a jolt that the house wasn't just a setting, it was the subject. "Someone's been documenting this place," he said, and Heller agreed, pointing out notes scribbled on scraps of paper, dates, names, references to city council meetings and zoning decisions stretching back years, a timeline of resentment meticulously assembled, and Stone felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, because obsession had a smell, and this room reeked of it. Downstairs, the forensic team had finished their work, but Stone lingered, drawn to a door at the end of a hallway that hadn't been opened yet, its handle stiff with age, and when he pushed it open, he found a small study, surprisingly intact, with shelves of books on architecture, history, urban planning, and at the center a heavy desk bearing the marks of use, its surface scarred but clean, and there, lying neatly arranged, were copies of letters addressed to Arthur Kellerman, the same. Letters Stone had seen summarized in his file, but here they were in their original form, ink pressed hard into paper, the language more personal, more desperate than the typed transcription suggested, and Stone felt the distance between victim and writer collapse into something uncomfortably intimate. Heller joined him, reading over his shoulder, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, because the letters weren't threats in a conventional sense. They were pleas, arguments, accusations wrapped in a belief that Kellerman had betrayed something sacred, and Stone knew then that whoever had written them hadn't seen themselves as a criminal, but as a custodian. Someone standing guard over a memory that the rest of the city had decided was expendable. Outside, the sound of traffic drifted in through a cracked window, grounding Stone in the present, and he closed the folder carefully, as if sudden movement might disturb the ghosts gathering in the corners of the room, and said, "We need to find whoever's been living here," knowing full well that the house itself might not be eager to give them up. The woman from the crowd returned to his mind, her watchful eyes, her distance, and Stone made a mental note to track her down, because in cases like this witnesses often hovered on the edges, unsure whether to step forward or retreat further into the shadows, and fear had a way of paralyzing people who believed they were already losing. At headquarters, the mood was tense but focused, the kind of collective concentration that only came when everyone sensed the case had layers, and Stone briefed the captain, careful to emphasize the symbolic nature of the crime without drifting into speculation, because experience had taught him that the line between insight and projection was thin and easy to cross. As the afternoon wore on, leads began to trickle in, reports of protests tied to Kellerman's projects, names of activists who had clashed publicly with him, and among them one name surfaced repeatedly: Eleanor Briggs, a longtime resident and unofficial historian of the neighborhood surrounding the castle, a woman known for her passionate speeches at council meetings and her refusal to move despite increasing pressure. And Stone felt the pieces begin to align, not into certainty, but into direction. He found Briggs's address easily enough, a modest apartment overlooking a street that had changed so much over the years it barely resembled its old self, and when she answered the door she looked exactly like Stone had imagined, composed, intelligent, her eyes sharp with conviction and fatigue, and he recognized her immediately as the woman from the crowd, the one who watched the watchers. She invited him in without hesitation. Offering tea he declined, and as they spoke Stone was struck by the careful way she chose her words, the balance she maintained between outrage and restraint, speaking of Kellerman as a symbol rather than a man, a force rather than a person, and when Stone asked about the castle her expression softened into something like grief, explaining its history, its role as a gathering place decades ago, the way it had anchored the community before neglect and speculation turned it into a battleground. "That house," she said quietly, "isn't empty, Lieutenant. It's full of people who don't have anywhere else to go," and Stone thought of the makeshift bed, the photographs, the letters, and he wondered how much of the truth she was telling him and how much she was protecting, because belief had a way of blurring those boundaries. When he left, dusk had settled over the city, the lights coming on one by one like constellations, and Stone felt the weight of the case pressing closer, the sense that every step forward also meant stepping into someone else's carefully guarded territory. Back at the castle later that night, responding to a report of movement inside, Stone and Heller moved through the darkened rooms with practiced ease, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the shadows, and for a moment the house felt alive, its old beams shifting and sighing as if aware of their presence. And then they heard it, a sound from above, a footstep too deliberate to be a rat, and Stone's heart rate ticked up, not with fear, but with anticipation, because this was the moment where theory met flesh and blood. They found the man in the turret room, thin, unshaven, eyes wide with defiance and exhaustion, his hands raised before they even spoke, and as Stone cuffed him gently, he noticed the way the man's gaze kept drifting back to the window, to the city spread out below like a living organism, and he wondered what it felt like to believe you were fighting something so vast it barely noticed you existed. The man's name was Thomas Riley, a former architect whose career had stalled years ago, whose idealism had curdled into bitterness, and as they let him out of the house, Stone felt a strange mix of relief and unease, because catching someone inside the castle didn't mean they'd caught the killer. It only meant they'd found one more voice in a chorus of anger, and the castle of fear, silent again, seemed to watch them go, patient as ever. Thomas Riley sat across the metal table in interview room B like a man who had already rehearsed his defeat, his shoulders slumped not from guilt but from exhaustion, the kind that came after years of arguing with a world that refused to listen, and Stone watched him carefully through the one-way glass before stepping inside, because men like Riley were rarely liars in the traditional sense. They told the truth as they saw it, filtered through layers of grievance and wounded pride, and that made them unpredictable. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee, a neutral space designed to strip away symbolism, and yet Riley carried the castle with him anyway, his eyes drifting upward as if the cracked ceiling tiles were turrets and towers, and Stone took a seat slowly, placing a thin folder on the table without opening it, a gesture meant to signal patience rather than pressure. "You've been living there," Stone said, not a question, and Riley nodded, his voice hoarse when he answered, explaining that the castle was the last place that still made sense to him, a structure built with intention, with craft, unlike the glass and steel boxes rising everywhere else, and Stone listened, letting Riley talk himself into revealing the map of his own obsessions, because people always did eventually. Riley spoke of Arthur Kellerman as if he were an abstraction, a force of erosion rather than a human being, describing zoning permits and demolition plans with the intensity of a man recounting personal betrayals, and when Stone finally asked where Riley had been the night Kellerman died, there was no hesitation in the answer, an alibi offered with the relief of someone who had feared the question, claiming he'd been in the castle but asleep, unaware of any visitors, and Stone felt the familiar dissonance, because the truth rarely arrived so neatly packaged. Heller joined them midway through, leaning casually against the wall, his presence shifting the energy in the room, and together they pressed gently, circling the same facts from different angles, and Riley grew defensive but not evasive, his frustration flaring whenever Kellerman's name was mentioned, yet stopping short of confession, and Stone began to believe that Riley wasn't their killer, not because he lacked motive, but because his anger was too loud, too performative, and killers who strangled their victims rarely needed an audience. Afterward, as Riley was processed and temporarily held, Stone and Heller walked the corridor in silence, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the space between them, until Heller said what Stone had been thinking, that Riley was a piece of the puzzle, not the picture, a man drawn to the castle symbolism but unlikely to have executed the crime with such restraint, and Stone agreed, his thoughts drifting back to Eleanor Briggs and her quiet intensity, her ability to frame loss as duty, and he wondered again where conviction ended and something darker began. Over the next 2 days, the investigation widened, threads spreading outward from Kellerman like cracks in old plaster, and Stone found himself buried in records, permits, minutes from city council meetings where voices like Briggs's rose in protest only to be drowned out by votes already decided, and the pattern that emerged was one of systematic displacement, of history being priced out of existence. And Stone understood why resentment had festered, why the castle had become a rallying point, But understanding motive didn't bring him closer to identifying a killer. A break came from an unexpected direction when a forensic analyst flagged something unusual about the bruising on Kellerman's neck, subtle inconsistencies that suggested not strength but precision, a controlled application of pressure consistent with someone trained to restrain without leaving obvious marks, and Stone's mind jumped immediately to law enforcement, military or private security backgrounds, and the pool of suspects shifted accordingly. Heller dug into Kellerman's recent hires, uncovering a consulting firm specializing in risk mitigation for developers facing public opposition, a polite euphemism for intimidation and surveillance, and Stone felt a familiar surge of anger because the line between protection and provocation was often drawn in disappearing ink. Among the consultants was a name that caught Stone's attention: Daniel Mercer, former police officer, forced out years earlier under circumstances that had left his record technically clean but morally questionable, a man known for his calm demeanor and his belief that order justified almost any means, and Stone felt the case tilt, not into clarity, but into something sharper. Mercer's address led them to a modern condo overlooking the bay, a space as impersonal as a hotel room, and when Mercer answered the door, he did so with a polite smile that never touched his eyes, inviting them in without protest, his posture relaxed, his tone cooperative, and Stone recognized the type instantly, a man who had learned how to perform innocence convincingly. They talked, exchanging pleasantries, discussing Kellerman in neutral terms, and Mercer admitted freely that he'd been hired to assess threats, to monitor protests, to ensure the developer's safety, but denied any involvement in his death, his alibi solid on paper, backed by timestamps and witnesses, and yet Stone felt a tension beneath the surface, a sense that Mercer was holding something back not out of fear, but out of calculation. As they left, Heller muttered that Mercer felt too clean, and Stone agreed, because men like Mercer believed rules were tools, not boundaries, and that belief had a way of resurfacing under pressure. Meanwhile, Eleanor Briggs's influence became more apparent, her name appearing not just in protest rosters, but in private correspondence between activists, her words shaping narratives, her presence lending legitimacy, and Stone arranged another meeting, this time at the castle itself, believing that context might loosen truths that neutral spaces suppressed. Briggs arrived at dusk, the house casting long shadows as she moved through it with familiarity bordering on intimacy, touching the walls, pausing at the stained glass window where Kellerman had been found, and Stone watched her closely as she spoke of memory and responsibility, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly, and he wondered whether grief or guilt lay beneath her composure. When Stone asked her directly if she had been in the castle the night of the murder, she met his gaze without flinching and said no, explaining that she'd stopped coming after threats escalated, that the house had become too dangerous, and Stone noted the phrasing, not that she hadn't been there, but that she'd stopped coming, a subtle distinction that lodged itself in his mind. As night settled in, the castle seemed to exhale, the city lights flickering below like distant signals, and Stone felt the weight of the investigation pressing inward, the sense that the truth was close enough to cast a shadow but still just out of reach. A late-night call from the lab brought another piece of the puzzle, fibers found on Kellerman's coat that matched upholstery from Mercer's firm's vehicles, circumstantial but suggestive, and Stone knew they were nearing a confrontation, one that would force someone to choose between control and exposure. Standing once more at the edge of the castle, looking out over San Francisco's uneven sprawl, Stone reflected that fear, once given a structure, became a fortress, and everyone involved in this case had built their own version, walls rising from belief, anger, or ambition, and it was his job to breach them, one by one, before the city lost another piece of itself to the past. The city reacted to Arthur Kellerman's death the way San Francisco always reacted to disruption, with a mixture of outrage, denial, and selective memory, newspapers running headlines that framed the murder as either a symptom of unchecked development or an isolated act of madness, depending on the political leanings of the editor. And Stone found himself navigating not just a homicide investigation, but a narrative war where every fact risked being weaponized. At headquarters, phones rang constantly, tips flooding in from residents who suddenly remembered old arguments, overheard threats, or suspicious figures near the castle, and Stone read them all with the practiced patience of a man who knew that truth often hid inside exaggeration, like a seed inside rotten fruit. Heller focused on Daniel Mercer, pushing quietly but relentlessly through the former officer's professional history, uncovering complaints that had never quite stuck, patterns of excessive control masked as efficiency, and Stone felt the familiar discomfort of investigating someone who knew the system well enough to exploit its blind spots. Mercer's alibi remained intact, but Stone had learned long ago that alibis didn't collapse under direct assault. They eroded when pressure was applied elsewhere, and so he turned his attention back to Kellerman's final hours, reconstructing them step by step, meeting by meeting, call by call, until the outline of that last day began to feel uncomfortably intimate. Kellerman had been nervous. That much was clear from interviews with colleagues, distracted, checking his watch, ending meetings early, and one assistant mentioned a call he'd taken privately, his tone shifting from confident to guarded, and Stone felt a spark of recognition, because killers rarely struck without first establishing a connection, a moment of trust or at least familiarity. Phone records led nowhere definitive, burner phones and blocked numbers muddying the trail, but Stone noticed a pattern of short calls clustered around evenings, calls that coincided with times Kellerman had visited the castle ostensibly to assess the property's condition, and Stone wondered who else might have been using the house as a meeting place, who might have believed its isolation offered safety. Eleanor Briggs's role grew more complicated with each passing day, her public statements growing sharper, her interviews framing Kellerman's death as tragic but inevitable, a predictable consequence of ignoring community voices, and Stone watched one such interview late one night, noting the careful calibration of her words, the way she avoided explicit endorsement of violence while stopping just short of condemning it. And he felt the old frustration rise because ideology provided cover for all kinds of sins. He requested surveillance on Briggs, not because he believed she was the killer, but because he suspected she knew more than she was saying, and knowledge, in cases like this, was currency. Meanwhile, Riley remained in holding, his presence a constant reminder that obsession didn't require action to be dangerous, and Stone checked in on him periodically, listening as Riley oscillated between despair and defiance, insisting that Kellerman's death had changed nothing, that the city would keep devouring itself, and Stone wondered whether that fatalism had made Riley blind to what was happening right under his nose. A second break came when a junior detective flagged a discrepancy in the castle's utility records, a brief spike in electricity usage late on the night of the murder, inconsistent with Riley's claim of being asleep in darkness, and Stone felt the case tighten again, because someone had been active in the house, moving with purpose, and the castle, for all its age, had remembered. Returning to the house with Heller, Stone walked the room slowly, reconstructing movement, imagining footsteps on stairs, doors opening and closing, and when they reached the study, Stone noticed something that had been subtly altered, a chair repositioned, its legs leaving faint impressions in dust that suggested someone had sat there recently, waiting, and the image that formed in Stone's mind was of a conversation gone wrong, of words escalating into physical certainty. They found another letter, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, addressed not to Kellerman but to an unnamed councilman, warning of consequences if the castle was touched, the language colder, more final than the others, and Stone realized that whoever had written it had crossed an internal line, shifting from protest to ultimatum. The handwriting didn't match Riley's, and a quick comparison eliminated Briggs as well, but the phrasing felt familiar, echoing language Stone had seen in Mercer's internal reports, the same clipped sentences, the same moral absolutism, and Stone felt a grim satisfaction mixed with dread, because the net was tightening around someone who knew exactly how to slip it. Mercer reacted to the renewed scrutiny with controlled irritation, filing a formal complaint about harassment, his legal counsel suddenly present at every interaction, and Stone recognized the tactic, escalation disguised as compliance, and he adjusted accordingly, shifting focus to Mercer's associates, men whose loyalty was based less on ethics than on shared history. One of them cracked under pressure, admitting that Mercer had been increasingly agitated in the weeks before Kellerman's death, frustrated that his role as protector had been undermined by the developer's insistence on handling things personally, and Stone felt the motive crystallize, not ideological but personal, a belief that Kellerman's recklessness had endangered order itself. The theory that emerged was unsettling in its simplicity, Mercer confronting Kellerman not as an assassin but as a disciplinarian, intending to scare him, restrain him, restore control, and something going wrong in that moment, a miscalculation, a slip, and Stone knew from experience that accidents born of arrogance were among the hardest truths for people to accept. Eleanor Briggs's surveillance produced its own revelations, late-night meetings with activists, hushed conversations that stopped when strangers approached, and one meeting stood out, a brief encounter between Briggs and Mercer in a cafe near City Hall, their interaction tense but purposeful, and Stone felt the last pieces begin to align, not into a neat conclusion, but into a shape that suggested complicity without conspiracy. Parallel motives intersecting briefly with fatal results. When confronted, Briggs admitted the meeting, explaining that Mercer had approached her offering a deal, protection for the castle in exchange for cooperation, and Stone felt a cold anger settle in, because preservation offered by someone like Mercer always came with invisible chains. She insisted she'd refused, that she'd warned Kellerman instead, urging him to back off, and Stone believed her, not because she was innocent of manipulation, but because her fear now felt genuine, the fear of someone realizing too late that they had helped set events in motion they could no longer control. As Stone prepared the warrant for Mercer's arrest, he returned once more to the castle alone, needing the quiet to think, and standing in the turret room he looked out over the city, the lights shimmering like distant fires, and he reflected that fear, once institutionalized, became policy, became procedure, and men like Mercer thrived in that environment, believing themselves necessary. The castle, silent and immovable, seemed to bear witness, and Stone promised it silently that this time, at least, fear would not be allowed to masquerade as justice. The warrant for Daniel Mercer's arrest felt heavier in Stone's hand than most, not because of the paper itself, but because of what it represented, a line drawn between authority and accountability that men like Mercer spent their lives trying to blur, and as Stone and Heller drove toward the former officer's condo just before dawn, the city looked deceptively calm, streets still damp from the night air, storefronts dark and patient, as if San Francisco itself were holding its breath. They moved quickly and quietly, the arrest executed with professional efficiency, Mercer offering no resistance, only that same thin smile that suggested he believed this was all a misunderstanding that would soon be corrected, and as Stone cuffed him, he felt the familiar tension of putting restraints on someone who had once worn the same badge, because betrayal of shared values always carried a particular sting. At headquarters, Mercer's composure held, his answers precise, his tone measured, insisting that his contact with Kellerman had been strictly advisory, that his meeting with Eleanor Briggs had been exploratory at worst, and Stone watched him closely, noting the subtle shifts, the moments where Mercer's eyes hardened when control slipped, because men like him didn't fear punishment as much as irrelevance. The evidence mounted steadily, fibers, letters, witness statements painting a picture of a man who believed he was entitled to intervene when systems failed, and yet the central question remained unresolved, whether Mercer had intended to kill Kellerman or whether the death had been an unintended consequence of restraint gone wrong, and Stone knew that distinction mattered, not just legally, but morally, because it defined whether this was an act of ideology or ego. As Mercer's attorney argued technicalities, Stone found himself returning mentally to the castle, to the way the house had absorbed the conflict and reflected it back, and he wondered whether anyone who stepped inside its walls could remain unchanged, whether the weight of accumulated fear and hope pressed equally on everyone or found its way into existing cracks. Eleanor Briggs came involuntarily later that day, her face drawn but resolute, and this time she spoke more freely, describing Mercer's proposition in detail, the implicit threat beneath the offer of protection, the sense that refusing him had felt dangerous, but accepting would have been worse, and Stone listened, feeling the complexity of her position settle in, because Briggs had wanted to save the castle, not sanctify violence, yet by engaging with Mercer, she had allowed herself to become part of his calculus. Riley, informed of Mercer's arrest, reacted with bitter laughter, dismissing the idea that order could be imposed by men like Mercer, insisting that Kellerman's death was inevitable regardless of who applied the pressure, and Stone recognized in Riley the same absolutism that drove Mercer, two sides of the same flawed conviction that the ends justified the means. The district attorney pushed for clarity, pressing Stone for a narrative that would hold up in court, and Stone struggled with the constraints of that demand, because the truth he was uncovering didn't fit neatly into a single motive or moment. It was a slow collision of beliefs, compromises, and unchecked authority that had finally produced a body on the floor of a decaying house. A breakthrough came when forensic reconstruction suggested Kellerman had been alive and conscious during the initial restraint, evidence that pointed to an encounter that began as a conversation, escalated into physical control, and only later crossed into fatal territory. And Stone felt the picture sharpen, Mercer confronting Kellerman in the study, asserting dominance under the guise of protection, misjudging his own strength or the man's fragility, and then, faced with the irreversible, choosing to leave rather than seek help, because men like Mercer never asked for assistance, they managed consequences. Confronted with this reconstruction, Mercer's composure finally cracked, not into confession but into anger, accusing Stone of misunderstanding necessity, of confusing order with cruelty, and Stone responded quietly, explaining that control without consent was just another form of violence, and for a moment Mercer looked genuinely surprised, as if the idea had never occurred to him. The case rippled outward, protests reigniting, voices raised on both sides, some decrying the arrest as scapegoating, others demanding broader accountability, and Stone found himself once again navigating the space between justice and public perception, aware that whatever the outcome, someone would feel betrayed. Returning to the castle one last time before it was officially sealed pending the investigation, Stone walked its rooms alone, tracing the paths that had led here, imagining the final moments not as a spectacle, but as a quiet failure of restraint, and he felt a deep weariness settle in, the kind that came from seeing how easily good intentions curdled when paired with unchecked power. The city council moved quickly after Mercer's arrest, suspending Kellerman's projects, commissioning reviews, gestures meant to signal responsiveness, and Stone watched these developments with cautious detachment, knowing that systems adapted without ever truly learning, that memory faded faster than consequences. As the sun set over the bay, casting long shadows through the castle's broken windows, Stone reflected that fear had many architects, some obvious, some respected, and dismantling one structure didn't mean the city was safe from building another, and yet he felt a measure of resolve, because for once the narrative hadn't been allowed to bury the truth entirely. Leaving the castle behind, Stone knew the case was moving toward resolution, but he also knew that closure was an illusion, that the real work lay in how the city chose to remember this moment, whether it would treat the Castle of Fear as a cautionary tale or simply another landmark stripped of its meaning. And as he stepped back onto the street, the fog rolling in once more, he carried with him the quiet determination to keep asking the uncomfortable questions, even when the answers threatened. The foundations people preferred not to examine. In the weeks following Daniel Mercer's arrest, San Francisco did what it always did best when confronted with uncomfortable truths. It fragmented them, turning complex events into competing stories that could be consumed, debated, and ultimately forgotten. And Stone watched this process unfold with a mixture of resignation and quiet resolve, aware that while his job was to solve crimes, he could never fully control what happened to their meanings afterward. The Castle of Fear was boarded up by city order, its iron gate chained shut, signs posted declaring it unsafe for entry, and yet people still gathered outside, leaving flowers, handwritten notes, protest signs, and occasionally bottles of cheap wine, transforming the crime scene into a contested shrine. And Stone knew that the house had become something larger than a murder location. It was now a symbol onto which the city projected its anxieties about change, power, and loss. Mercer remained in custody awaiting formal charges, his legal team aggressively shaping a narrative of tragic accident and overzealous prosecution, and Stone followed each development carefully, understanding that men like Mercer thrived in gray areas, that ambiguity was their natural habitat. Heller, meanwhile, focused on tightening the evidentiary chain, re-interviewing witnesses, stress-testing timelines, ensuring that nothing could be easily dismissed as coincidence, and Stone appreciated his partner's rigor, because cases like this collapsed not from lack of truth, but from failure to articulate it clearly enough. Eleanor Briggs withdrew from public view for a time, declining interviews, her apartment dark when Stone passed by on routine drives, and he wondered whether she was regrouping or simply exhausted, because conviction carried a cost, and hers had been extracted in installments over decades. Riley was released pending further evaluation, his usefulness as a suspect exhausted, and when Stone saw him leave the station, thin and defiant, he felt no satisfaction. Only the uneasy awareness that men like Riley didn't disappear, they simply found new forums for their grievances. The district attorney's office pressed forward, formalizing charges against Mercer that balanced restraint-related homicide with abandonment, a legal framing that acknowledged both intent and negligence, and Stone spent long hours preparing testimony, replaying conversations in his mind, scrutinizing his own assumptions, because he knew defense attorneys would do the same, only with sharper knives. Late one night, unable to sleep, Stone drove back toward Russian Hill, parking a block away from the castle, standing across the street watching its darkened silhouette against the fog, and he thought about how many lives had intersected here without ever truly meeting, how proximity didn't guarantee understanding, and how fear, once embedded in a place, became self-sustaining. A noise drew his attention, footsteps approaching, and he turned to see Eleanor Briggs emerge from the mist, carrying a small box, her expression tired but composed, and for a moment they simply stood there, two figures acknowledging a shared burden without words. Briggs explained that she had requested permission to retrieve personal items from the castle before it was permanently sealed, artifacts she considered part of the neighborhood's history, photographs, letters, ephemera that would otherwise be lost, and Stone agreed to escort her, aware that closure sometimes required ritual as much as resolution. Inside, the house felt different now, stripped of activity, its silence deeper, heavier, and Briggs moved through the room slowly, touching walls, pausing at corners, narrating memories not just of events but of feelings, community meetings held in the parlor decades ago, children playing on the stairs, neighbors arguing and reconciling, and Stone listened, struck by the way places accumulated emotional residue that no permit could erase. In the study, Briggs opened the box, carefully selecting items, and she stopped when she reached the stained glass window, her voice catching as she spoke of Kellerman, acknowledging for the first time that while she despised what he represented, she had never wished him dead, that his death felt like a theft of moral clarity, because now everything was compromised. Stone didn't respond immediately, knowing that absolution wasn't his to give, and instead he watched as she placed one final object into the box, a small plaque commemorating the castle's original architect, a detail Stone hadn't noticed before, and he realized then that the house had been built not as a fortress, but as a gathering place, its later reputation a distortion born of neglect and conflict. The trial preparations intensified, media scrutiny sharpening, and Stone found himself called to testify at preliminary hearings, his words dissected, his motives questioned, and he maintained his composure by focusing on facts, on sequence, on evidence, because ideology was a distraction the defense would eagerly exploit. Mercer, in court, presented a study in controlled indignation, insisting he had acted to prevent greater harm, that Kellerman had been reckless, that intervention was necessary, and Stone felt the familiar frustration of watching someone articulate justification with such confidence, because belief, when rehearsed long enough, became indistinguishable from truth to the believer. Outside the courtroom, protesters gathered on both sides, chants colliding, signs contradicting each other, and Stone passed through them silently, acutely aware that justice was rarely satisfying to everyone, that its function was not comfort, but accountability. A complication arose when new documents surfaced, internal emails from Kellerman's firm suggesting he had planned to sell the castle after all, potentially undermining the narrative that his death halted irreversible change, and Stone felt the case wobble because facts had a way of eroding symbolism, and symbolism was what had fueled so much of the public reaction. He met with the district attorney to discuss the implications, emphasizing that regardless of Kellerman's intentions, Mercer's actions remained unjustified, that the law did not grant private enforcers the authority to restrain and abandon, and the DA agreed, though Stone could see the political calculations flickering behind his eyes. Heller uncovered another troubling detail. Mercer had accessed old police training manuals focusing on restraint techniques shortly before the incident, reinforcing the argument that his actions were deliberate rather than spontaneous, and Stone felt a grim validation, because preparation implied choice, and choice implied responsibility. As the case moved closer to trial, Stone noticed subtle changes in himself, a heightened sensitivity to power dynamics, a quicker impatience with bureaucratic shortcuts, and he wondered whether the castle had altered him too, whether bearing witness to fear so concentrated had recalibrated his internal compass. One evening, he visited his father's grave, a ritual he returned to during difficult cases, and he spoke quietly about the investigation, about the burden of judgment, about the way authority tempted even those who believed themselves righteous, and standing there, he felt the weight of lineage, of lessons inherited and sometimes misapplied. The city council announced plans to convert the castle into a protected historical site with community oversight, a compromise framed as progress, and Stone greeted the news with cautious optimism, knowing that preservation without understanding was merely cosmetic, but also recognizing the value of tangible commitments. On the eve of the trial, Stone returned to the castle one final time. Authorized for inspection, and standing alone in the turret room, he looked out over San Francisco, its lights shimmering, its contradictions intact, and he reflected that fear had not been vanquished, only exposed, that it would resurface in new forms, new structures, new justifications, and yet he felt a measure of peace, because exposure mattered, because truth, however inconvenient, had a way of altering the landscape in subtle but lasting ways. Leaving the house, locking the gate behind him, Stone understood that the case was no longer just about what had happened within these walls, but about what the city chose to learn from it, and as he walked away into the fog, he carried with him the quiet conviction that while San Francisco might remember selectively, his duty was to remember fully, to hold the line where fear tried to pass itself off as necessity. The trial of Daniel Mercer unfolded less like a legal proceeding and more like a referendum on authority itself, and Stone felt that tension the moment he stepped into the courthouse, the air thick with expectation, the hallways crowded with journalists, activists, and spectators who treated the case not as a question of fact, but as a stage upon which their own anxieties could perform. Mercer sat at the defense table composed and immaculate, his posture disciplined, his expression one of calm grievance, and Stone recognized the strategy immediately, the careful cultivation of credibility, the suggestion that this was a man wronged by circumstances and misunderstood by systems he once served. The prosecution opened with a methodical reconstruction of the night Arthur Kellerman died, laying out timelines, movements, forensic conclusions, and Stone listened intently, alert for weaknesses, because trials were not about truth in its raw form, but about which version of events could survive the pressure of doubt. When Stone took the stand, he felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the courtroom fading until only questions and answers existed, and he spoke clearly, deliberately, recounting the investigation without embellishment, emphasizing restraint, sequence, and responsibility, because he knew the defense would seize on any hint of moral judgment as bias. Mercer's attorney was skilled, probing gently at first, then more aggressively, questioning Stone's interpretation of Mercer's intent, suggesting that hindsight colored his conclusions, implying that Stone's presence at the castle had imbued him with an emotional investment that compromised objectivity, and Stone responded evenly, grounding each answer in evidence, in procedure, in the limits of inference. And he felt a quiet satisfaction in watching the attorney's frustration surface when rhetoric failed to unsettle facts. Eleanor Briggs testified next, her voice steady but subdued, and as she spoke of the castle's history, of her meeting with Mercer, of her warnings to Kellerman, Stone watched the jury carefully, noting moments of empathy, skepticism, and confusion, because Briggs embodied the case's moral ambiguity, a woman driven by preservation who had unknowingly brushed against violence. And her testimony complicated any attempt to reduce the narrative to heroes and villains. The defense attempted to paint Briggs as a radical influence, a catalyst who had inflamed tensions, and Stone felt a surge of irritation because scapegoating was an old tactic, and yet he reminded himself that trials were adversarial by design, truth emerging not through courtesy, but through collision. As days passed, expert witnesses took the stand. Forensic analysts explaining pressure points and timing, psychologists discussing control dynamics and escalation, urban historians contextualizing the castle's symbolic weight, and the case expanded outward, its center of gravity shifting repeatedly until Stone worried that the core facts might be lost amid interpretation. Outside the courthouse, demonstrations grew louder, chants echoing off stone facades, signs declaring Mercer a murderer or a martyr depending on the holder, and Stone felt the strange dislocation of knowing that the same evidence could inspire such divergent convictions, because belief often preceded understanding rather than the other way around. One afternoon, during a recess, Stone found himself alone in a quiet hallway with Mercer, guards stationed nearby, and for a brief moment their eyes met without intermediaries, without legal framing, and Stone saw not defiance, but something closer to disappointment, as if Mercer still believed that reason, properly explained, would vindicate him, and Stone felt a fleeting sadness, because that belief had likely fueled the very actions that brought them here. The defense's closing argument leaned heavily on intention, asserting that Mercer had never meant to kill, that his training and experience made him uniquely capable of managing volatile situations, that the death was a tragic anomaly rather than a foreseeable outcome, and Stone listened with a tightening jaw because he knew how seductive that argument could be to a jury wary of condemning authority. The prosecution countered by reframing intention not as desire but as acceptance, arguing that Mercer had accepted the risk inherent in restraining Kellerman, had chosen control over caution, and had abandoned responsibility when consequences arose, and Stone felt a quiet alignment with that framing because it mirrored the conclusions he had reached alone in the castle's shadow. When the jury retired to deliberate, the courthouse exhaled, tension giving way to restless waiting, and Stone stepped outside, the fog rolling in thick and low, wrapping the city in its familiar ambiguity, and he wondered whether ambiguity itself was San Francisco's defining trait, a place where clarity was always provisional. The verdict came late in the evening, the jury finding Mercer guilty on the primary charge, the room erupting in mixed reactions, gasps, applause quickly silenced, and Stone watched Mercer absorb the decision with a rigid stillness that suggested not shock but recalibration, as if he were already rewriting the story to accommodate this outcome. Sentencing was scheduled for a later date, but the symbolic weight of the verdict landed immediately, headlines already forming, narratives solidifying, and Stone felt the peculiar hollowness that followed major cases, the sense that resolution arrived without relief. In the days that followed, commentators debated the implications, some warning that the verdict would discourage proactive security measures, others celebrating it as a reaffirmation of limits, and Stone avoided the noise, retreating into routine, paperwork, follow-ups, the mundane tasks that reminded him that no single case defined his work. He visited Eleanor Briggs once more, this time at her apartment, where boxes of recovered artifacts lined the walls, and they spoke quietly about the trial, about the castle's future, about the cost of belief, and Briggs admitted that the verdict had not brought her peace, only clarity, the understanding that preservation could not be built on coercion without becoming its opposite. Riley sent Stone a letter from a halfway house, rambling and intense, railing against the verdict as proof of systemic hypocrisy, and Stone read it carefully before filing it away, recognizing in Riley's words the persistence of absolutism, the refusal to accept complexity, and he wondered how many such letters he would read before retirement. The city council finalized plans for the castle's restoration, committees formed, funding allocated, press conferences held, and Stone attended one briefly, standing at the back as officials spoke of community and heritage, and he felt a cautious hope tempered by experience, because institutions learn slowly, if at all. One evening, long after the trial had ended, Stone returned to the castle site. Now surrounded by scaffolding and work lights, the house partially illuminated, its scars exposed, and he walked the perimeter, listening to the sounds of renovation, hammers, voices, movement, and he felt a strange comfort in the activity because transformation, however imperfect, suggested engagement rather than abandonment. Standing there, he reflected on the case's arc, on how fear had drawn disparate lives together, on how control had masqueraded as necessity, on how belief had both inspired and blinded, and he accepted that no verdict could fully resolve those tensions. As he turned to leave, the fog lifting slightly, revealing the city beyond in layered lights and shadows, Stone felt a renewed commitment to vigilance, not just against crime, but against the subtle encroachments of authority unchecked by humility, and he understood that his role, like the castle's new purpose, was not to dominate the landscape, but to bear witness, to remember fully in a city inclined to remember selectively. In the months after the verdict, San Francisco settled into a version of calm that Stone had learned never to fully trust, the kind that followed public reckoning when attention drifted elsewhere but underlying tensions remained unresolved, and he moved through his days with an awareness sharpened by the case, noticing small shifts in tone, in posture, in the way authority asserted itself more cautiously in some spaces and more aggressively in others. Mercer's sentencing came and went without drama, the judge delivering a measured statement about responsibility and restraint, and Stone watched from the back of the courtroom as Mercer listened, his expression unreadable, and he wondered whether the words would penetrate the armor of rationalization Mercer had worn for so long or simply add another layer. The castle's restoration began in earnest, construction crews swarming the site, scaffolding rising like a temporary exoskeleton, and Stone found himself driving past more often than necessary, drawn by the sight of transformation, by the strange comfort of seeing damage addressed rather than ignored. Yet even as the house changed, the neighborhood remained restless, debates flaring at community meetings about what preservation truly meant, who got to define it, and Stone attended a few in plain clothes, listening rather than speaking, absorbing the familiar cadence of grievance and hope that defined civic engagement in a city perpetually negotiating with its own past. Eleanor Briggs emerged gradually from her withdrawal, taking on an advisory role in the Restoration Committee, her rhetoric softened but no less passionate, and when Stone ran into her at a cafe near City Hall, they spoke briefly, acknowledging without sentimentality that the case had altered them both, that belief now carried an added weight of caution. Riley drifted further to the margins, his letters growing less frequent, his ideas no less rigid, and Stone recognized the pattern, the way unresolved anger sought new containers, new symbols, and he wondered how many castles of fear existed across the city, unseen until conflict gave them shape. At the precinct, new cases demanded attention, robberies, assaults, domestic disputes, the everyday violence that rarely made headlines, and Stone threw himself into the work with renewed focus, because routine had a grounding effect, reminding him that while symbolic cases defined careers, ordinary ones sustained communities. Heller, ever observant, remarked one evening that Stone seemed different, more deliberate, and Stone considered the observation before agreeing, admitting that the Castle case had recalibrated his sense of scale, that it had reminded him how easily authority slid from service into domination when unchecked by reflection. A training seminar on restraint techniques brought Mercer's shadow back into focus, and Stone spoke up more than usual, emphasizing accountability, consent, and proportionality, and he noticed younger officers listening closely, some skeptical, some receptive, and he hoped that seeds were being planted, even if he knew not all would take root. Outside the department, the city's development machine continued its steady churn, permits approved, buildings rising, protests flaring and fading, and Stone tracked these patterns with a new sensitivity, alert to the ways power justified itself through inevitability, the quiet insistence that progress could not wait for consensus. One evening, while reviewing files late at the office, Stone received a call from Briggs, her voice measured but tense, explaining that anonymous letters had begun arriving again, this time not threatening demolition but warning against sanitized memory, accusing the Restoration Committee of turning the castle into a museum devoid of meaning, and Stone felt a familiar tightening, because language like that often preceded escalation. He advised caution, increased awareness, and arranged for patrols near the site, aware that symbolism, once activated, rarely de-escalated on its own. The letters multiplied, their tone shifting from accusatory to prophetic, invoking cycles of loss and betrayal, and Stone recognized echoes of earlier rhetoric, not Riley's bombast but something quieter, more disciplined, and he began to suspect that the castle story had inspired new custodians, people who saw themselves as inheritors of an unfinished struggle. Surveillance produced little, the authors careful, the delivery methods varied, and Stone resisted the urge to overreact, knowing that fear fed on attention, yet he remained vigilant, because he had seen how quickly belief could crystallize into action when conditions aligned. During a walkthrough of the nearly restored castle, Stone accompanied Briggs and a city architect, listening as they discussed design choices, interpretive plaques, the balance between preservation and accessibility, and standing in the study, now stripped and reinforced. Stone felt the absence of tension that had once permeated the space, the air lighter, the echoes different, and he wondered whether places truly healed or merely adapted. The stained glass window had been removed for restoration, leaving a plain opening through which the city was visible in stark clarity, and Stone found the view unsettling, as if symbolism had been temporarily suspended, leaving only reality exposed. Later that night, a patrol unit reported suspicious activity near the castle, figures moving quickly, equipment disturbed, and Stone responded personally, his pulse steady but alert, arriving to find graffiti sprayed on a temporary barrier, words accusing the city of erasure, of calm modifying fear, and Stone felt a mix of irritation and recognition, because protest often defaulted to vandalism when dialogue failed, and yet the underlying sentiment demanded attention. Reviewing footage from nearby cameras, Stone noticed a pattern, movements coordinated, purposeful, suggesting planning rather than impulse, and he briefed Heller, both of them aware that this was not a resurgence of the original case, but an aftershock, the reverberation of unresolved meaning. They identified a small group of activists, loosely affiliated, younger than Briggs's cohort, their rhetoric sharper, less patient, and Stone arranged meetings, choosing conversation over confrontation, believing that early engagement might prevent escalation. The meetings were tense but revealing, the activists accusing the city of co-opting dissent, of turning a site of resistance into a curated experience, and Stone listened, careful not to dismiss their concerns, explaining the boundaries of lawful protest, the consequences of crossing them, and he saw in their eyes a familiar struggle between expression and efficacy. One young man, earnest and intense, challenged Stone directly, asking whether justice had truly been served or merely rebranded, and Stone answered honestly, saying that justice was rarely complete, that it was an ongoing negotiation rather than a final state, and he wasn't sure whether the answer satisfied or frustrated, but it felt necessary. As weeks passed, the incident subsided, the activists redirecting their energy towards sanctioned events, debates continuing but without violence, and Stone allowed himself a cautious exhale, recognizing that de-escalation was its own form of success, even if it lacked spectacle. The castle's reopening approached, invitations sent, speeches planned, and Stone debated whether to attend, aware that his presence might be interpreted as endorsement, or worse, as appropriation of the story, and he ultimately decided to go briefly, anonymously, blending into the crowd. On the day, the fog lifted just enough to reveal the house in renewed detail, its stone cleaned, its windows restored, its presence both familiar and altered, and Stone stood at the back as officials spoke of resilience and community, and he noted what was left unsaid, the tension smoothed over rather than confronted. Wandering inside afterward, he observed visitors reading plaques, listening to guides, interpreting the space through curated narratives, and he wondered how many would sense the weight beneath the surface, the quiet violence that had forced change. In the turret room, now open and bright, Stone paused, looking out over the city, the same view that had framed so many pivotal moments, and he felt a complex blend of satisfaction and unease, because restoration had brought visibility, but also finality, and finality often dulled vigilance. Leaving the castle, merging back into the city's flow, Stone reflected that cases never truly ended, they echoed, shaping behavior, discourse, and perception long after files were closed, and he accepted that his role extended beyond resolution into stewardship, a responsibility to remember without mythologizing, to acknowledge fear without building monuments to it. As evening fell, the city lights flickering on, Stone returned to his car, the hum of traffic grounding him, and he felt a quiet readiness for whatever came next, aware that the streets of San Francisco would continue to produce their own castles, their own conflicts between past and future, and that his task was not to eliminate fear but to prevent it from becoming architecture again. The reopening of the castle did not bring the sense of closure many had predicted, and Stone felt that absence almost immediately, like a low-grade tremor beneath the city's daily rhythms, subtle enough to ignore but persistent enough to register if you stood still long enough, and he found himself paying closer attention to the spaces between events rather than the events themselves, the pauses in conversation. The way eyes lingered a fraction too long on certain headlines, because fault lines rarely announce themselves loudly before shifting. At the precinct, a new pattern emerged in the weeks following the reopening. Minor incidents clustered around historic sites, not violent but disruptive, coordinated sit-ins, unauthorized installations, symbolic gestures designed to provoke dialogue or confrontation depending on one's perspective, and Stone recognized the strategic intelligence behind them. The way dissent adapted to visibility, choosing moments that maximized attention while minimizing immediate consequence. Heller noted the same trend, remarking that the castle had become a reference point, a shorthand for resistance against institutional narrative, and Stone agreed, understanding that symbols, once established, rarely remained static. They evolved, absorbing new grievances, new aspirations. Eleanor Briggs remained publicly supportive of the castle's new status, but in private conversations she admitted unease, acknowledging that the restoration risked flattening complexity, and Stone appreciated her candor because it suggested growth rather than entrenchment, a willingness to interrogate one's own victories. Meanwhile, the activist group Stone had met earlier splintered, some members channeling their energy into policy advocacy, others drifting toward more confrontational tactics, and Stone tracked these divergences carefully because fragmentation often preceded escalation, especially when charismatic figures emerged to promise clarity in a landscape defined by compromise. One such figure appeared in the form of Lucas Herrera, a graduate student turned organizer whose rhetoric was polished, historically grounded, and emotionally resonant, and Stone watched recordings of Herrera's speeches with professional interest, noting the way he framed the castle not as an endpoint, but as a cautionary example of institutional absorption, a warning that dissent, once domesticated, lost its teeth. Herrera's arguments were not overtly violent, but they carried an absolutist undertone that made Stone uneasy, the implication that legitimacy flowed only from opposition, that cooperation was a form of surrender, and Stone had seen that logic before, its trajectory predictable even when its starting point felt reasonable. The first real sign of trouble came during a late-night patrol when officers responded to an alarm at a historic warehouse slated for redevelopment, finding banners hung from scaffolding, slogans echoing Herrera's language, and Stone felt the case shift subtly because this was no longer about the castle itself, but about the narrative it had spawned. Surveillance footage revealed careful planning, avoidance of cameras, coordination that suggested discipline rather than spontaneity, and Stone briefed his superiors, emphasizing that while no crime of serious magnitude had occurred, the pattern warranted attention before it hardened into something more dangerous. His recommendation was met with measured agreement, resources allocated cautiously, and Stone understood the calculus, the reluctance to appear heavy-handed in the absence of overt violence, yet he remained alert because early intervention often determined trajectories. He requested a meeting with Herrera, framing it as dialogue rather than interrogation, and Herrera accepted, meeting Stone at a neutral cafe near the university, his demeanor confident but not dismissive, and Stone found the conversation intellectually engaging and professionally frustrating because Herrera articulated grievances with precision, acknowledging boundaries while questioning their legitimacy. And Stone recognized the familiar dance, the push and pull between expression and enforcement. Herrera denied any involvement in illegal activities, emphasizing that symbolic disruption was a time-honored tradition, and Stone did not dispute the history, instead probing at responsibility, at the line where symbolism risked harm, and Herrera responded with philosophical arguments about structural violence, and Stone felt the old tension rise, because abstraction had a way of obscuring consequence. Leaving the meeting, Stone felt neither reassured nor alarmed, only aware that Herrera's influence was growing, his words finding fertile ground among those disillusioned by incremental change, and Stone knew that monitoring would be necessary, not because dissent was dangerous, but because absolutism was. Concurrently, an internal review within the department surfaced concerns about private security firms operating with minimal oversight, a lingering echo of the Mercer case, and Stone participated actively, advocating for clearer boundaries, training standards, and accountability, and he sensed resistance from some quarters, the old arguments about necessity resurfacing, and he realized that the castle's lessons were still being contested within the very institution tasked with enforcing them. The city council debated new regulations on development transparency, hearings marked by familiar rhetoric, and Stone attended one anonymously, listening as Herrera testified, his words sharp but controlled, and Stone noted how easily the room leaned in, how hunger for certainty trumped patience for nuance. And he wondered whether the city was prepared to grapple with complexity or whether it would continue oscillating between extremes. Late one evening, Stone received a call from Briggs, her voice tight, reporting that she had been approached by Herrera's associates, urging her to publicly denounce the castle's restoration as a betrayal, and Stone felt a surge of concern, because pressure on symbolic figures often signaled an attempt to consolidate narrative authority. He advised her to document the interactions, to maintain distance, and offered support, aware that while she was resilient, she was not immune to intimidation disguised as persuasion. Days later, a fire broke out at a vacant historic building in the Mission District, quickly contained, damage minimal, but graffiti at the scene echoed the same slogans, and Stone felt the tremor intensify, because fire, even symbolic, shifted the stakes irrevocably. Investigators determined the blaze had been set deliberately but carelessly, more statement than sabotage, and Stone recognized the danger of that calculus, the belief that intent mitigated risk, because fires did not negotiate, they consumed. The department escalated its response, surveillance expanded, outreach intensified, and Stone found himself balancing prevention with restraint, determined not to repeat the mistakes that had led to Mercer's sense of entitlement, and he emphasized this balance repeatedly in briefings, invoking the castle not as a warning against dissent, but against unexamined authority. Herrera issued a statement condemning the fire, while contextualizing the anger behind it, and Stone parsed the language carefully, noting the disavowal paired with justification, a rhetorical maneuver that preserved credibility across audiences, and he understood then that Herrera was navigating his own fault lines, attempting to control a movement that was beginning to exceed him. Stone and Heller tracked the individuals responsible for the fire, young, impulsive, more committed to visibility than consequence, and arrests were made quietly, charges calibrated to reflect accountability without martyrdom, and Stone felt a cautious satisfaction, because proportion mattered, because escalation fed on overreaction as much as neglect. The incident sparked renewed debate, editorials warning of radicalization, others accusing the city of criminalizing protest, and Stone retreated once more into the quiet spaces of investigation, focusing on facts, on patterns, on the slow work of prevention that rarely made headlines. One night, after a long shift, Stone returned to the castle, now closed after hours, standing outside the gate, listening to the city's distant hum, and he thought about how places accumulated meaning through repetition, how each conflict layered itself onto the last, creating density that could either support understanding or collapse under weight. He realized then that the castle's true legacy was not fear but friction, the productive discomfort that forced examination, and he wondered whether the city could learn to inhabit that discomfort without resorting to dominance or destruction. As fog rolled in, softening edges, Stone accepted that fault lines were not failures but features, indicators of pressure and potential movement, and that his role was not to seal them shut but to monitor, to respond when shifts threaten lives, to allow space for expression while holding firm against harm. Leaving the castle behind, he felt the familiar blend of vigilance and humility settle in, aware that the streets of San Francisco were alive with stories still unfolding, that the Castle of Fear had become one chapter in a longer narrative about power, memory, and restraint, and that the next test would not announce itself with sirens but with choices, quiet and consequential, made by people convinced they were acting in the name of something larger than themselves. In the months that followed the Mission District fire, the city adopted a tone of cautious vigilance that Stone found both reassuring and unsettling, because while awareness had sharpened, so too had the temptation to simplify, and he sensed that many stakeholders were growing impatient with ambiguity, eager for clean conclusions that reality stubbornly refused to provide. The department implemented new interagency protocols emphasizing de-escalation and intelligence sharing, and Stone was tasked with coordinating between municipal authorities, historical preservation boards, and community organizations, a role that required as much listening as enforcement, and he leaned into it, believing that controlled burns, deliberate and measured, could prevent wildfires of misunderstanding. Herrera remained a prominent voice, his public appearances framed by calls for accountability without destruction, and Stone noted the subtle recalibration of his rhetoric, an attempt to rein in the more volatile elements that had begun to orbit his movement, and Stone understood the difficulty of that position, because leadership often meant inheriting responsibility for actions one neither ordered nor condoned. At the same time, anonymous pamphlets began circulating in neighborhoods near redevelopment zones, their language sharper, more confrontational, invoking historical grievances with less nuance, and Stone suspected that a faction had splintered off, less interested in persuasion than provocation, and this concerned him more than Herrera ever had, because fragmentation stripped movements of internal breaks. Surveillance confirmed his suspicion, revealing a small cell operating independently, communicating through encrypted channels, staging minor acts of vandalism designed to provoke response, and Stone briefed his team with emphasis on restraint, warning that overreaction would validate their narrative of oppression. The challenge lay in distinguishing between expressive dissent and preparatory escalation, and Stone spent long nights reviewing timelines, cross-referencing participants, searching for patterns that suggested intent rather than impulse, and he found that what united the cell was not ideology but alienation, a sense of having been sidelined by both institutions and movements that claimed to represent them. This insight guided Stone's approach, leading him to recommend outreach alongside enforcement, a dual strategy that some colleagues questioned, arguing that firmness alone would deter further acts, and Stone countered that deterrence, without legitimacy, merely displaced behavior rather than transforming it. He arranged discreet meetings with community mediators, sharing intelligence without names, focusing on grievances rather than suspects, and these conversations yielded small but meaningful shifts, public forums where anger could be voiced without spectacle, where frustration could be acknowledged without endorsement. Meanwhile, the city council advanced new oversight measures for private security, incorporating lessons from Mercer's case, and Stone testified in support, his words measured, emphasizing that accountability strengthened rather than weakened public trust, and he sensed that while resistance remained, momentum had shifted, the castle's shadow still shaping discourse. Eleanor Briggs continued her work at the castle, curating exhibits that addressed the recent controversies directly, and Stone admired her refusal to sanitize history, her willingness to include dissenting perspectives even when they complicated the narrative of restoration, and he saw in her work a model for institutional humility that law enforcement often struggled to emulate. Yet tension persisted, and it crystallized one afternoon when a protest plan near the castle escalated unexpectedly, a subgroup breaking from the agreed route, attempting to breach a restricted area, and Stone was on scene, negotiating through a megaphone, his voice calm, invoking the agreements made, appealing to the shared interest in safety. The moment teetered, bodies pressing forward, adrenaline rising, and Stone felt the familiar narrowing of focus that preceded either resolution or disaster, and he chose to step closer, lowering the megaphone, speaking directly to the individuals at the front, acknowledging their anger while drawing a firm line, and slowly, painfully, the pressure eased, the breach aborted, and the protest concluded without arrests. In the aftermath, criticism came from all sides, some accusing the department of weakness, others of intimidation, and Stone absorbed it quietly, understanding that success in such moments rarely satisfied observers invested in absolutes. Later that evening, he reviewed footage, analyzing microdecisions, searching for lessons, and he concluded that trust, once established, created space for restraint, but that trust was fragile, easily eroded by inconsistency or fear. The splinter cell did not disappear, but its activities diminished, deprived of oxygen by lack of spectacle, and Stone considered this a partial victory, aware that underlying grievances remained unresolved, simmering beneath the surface. Herrera reached out privately, requesting another meeting, and this time the conversation was more candid. Herrera admitting his struggle to maintain cohesion, his fear that the movement's moral clarity was being diluted by tactics he could not endorse yet could not fully control, and Stone listened, recognizing the parallel with his own role, the tension between command and conscience. They spoke not as adversaries, but as professionals navigating complex systems, and Stone suggested avenues for nonviolent engagement, policy-focused campaigns that could channel energy productively, and while Herrera did not commit, he seemed to consider the possibility, and Stone left the meeting cautiously optimistic. Yet optimism was tempered by a new development when an internal audit revealed that a private contractor hired for crowd control at a recent event had exceeded its mandate, detaining individuals without proper authority, and Stone felt the old anger flare, because this was precisely the kind of unchecked power that had fueled earlier crises. He pushed for immediate suspension pending investigation, facing pushback from administrators concerned about liability and optics, and Stone argued forcefully that failure to act decisively would undermine the very legitimacy they sought to protect, and after tense deliberation, his position prevailed. The contractor was removed, an inquiry launched, and while the decision drew criticism from some quarters, Stone sensed that the department had crossed an important threshold, choosing principle over expedience. Public reaction was mixed, but among community groups, the response was cautiously positive, a recognition that accountability was not merely rhetorical. As weeks passed, the city settled into a tentative equilibrium, protests continuing but largely peaceful, dialogue ongoing but unresolved, and Stone remained alert, aware that equilibrium was not stability but a pause between shifts. He found himself returning often to the idea of controlled burns, the necessity of allowing tension to release in measured ways rather than suppressing it until it exploded, and he advocated for policies that institutionalized dialogue, that recognized dissent as a form of civic participation rather than a threat. The castle, now a site of both memory and contestation, hosted a symposium on power and preservation, and Stone attended anonymously, listening as scholars, activists, and officials debated the ethics of authority, and he felt a rare sense of alignment, the recognition that while agreement was elusive, engagement itself was progress. Near the end of the symposium, a speaker quoted an old fire management principle that not all fires were destructive, that some cleared underbrush and renewed ecosystems, and Stone smiled at the unintended echo, feeling validated in his instinct that suppression alone was not the answer. Driving home through fog-laced streets, he reflected on how fear operated, how it could either constrict or clarify, and he realized that the castle of fear had evolved from a place into a process, a continual negotiation between past abuses and future aspirations. He accepted that his work would never be finished, that each resolution seeded new questions, and that the measure of success lay not in silence, but in the quality of noise, the difference between dialogue and chaos. As he parked and sat for a moment, engine off, listening to the city breathe, Stone felt a cautious resolve, aware that controlled burns required constant attention, humility, and the courage to intervene without dominating, and he prepared himself for the next phase, knowing that the most dangerous fires often smoldered unseen, waiting for a careless spark. What unsettled Stone most in the weeks after the symposium was not the persistence of protests or the ongoing friction between institutions and activists, but the quiet that began to settle unevenly across the city, a selective silence that felt intentional rather than organic, as if certain conversations were being deferred rather than resolved. And he had learned long ago that deferred conflicts rarely faded on their own. Reports crossing his desk suggested a decline in visible incidents, fewer demonstrations, fewer confrontations, yet the intelligence briefings hinted at something less reassuring: a migration of discourse from public spaces into private channels, encrypted forums, closed meetings, invitation-only gatherings where grievances hardened without challenge. Stone recognized the pattern from earlier chapters of his career, the moment when visibility gave way to consolidation, when movements recalibrated away from persuasion toward preparation, and though there was no immediate evidence of violence, the psychological shift concerned him more than shattered windows ever had. Herrera had gone quiet as well, canceling public appearances, issuing only carefully worded statements that emphasized reflection and internal dialogue, and Stone wondered whether this was strategic restraint or the loss of control he had feared, because absence often created space for more extreme voices to claim legitimacy. Within the department, the mood mirrored the city's ambivalence, relief at the absence of crisis tempered by unease, and Stone found himself reminding younger officers that calm was not the same as resolution, that vigilance did not end when sirens stopped. The internal investigation into the private contractor progressed, uncovering procedural shortcuts and implicit encouragement from mid-level administrators to prioritize efficiency over legality, and Stone insisted that the findings be released publicly, arguing that partial transparency would only breed suspicion, and after protracted debate, the decision was made to publish a redacted but substantive report. The response was predictably polarized, some praising the department's candor, others accusing it of scapegoating, yet Stone felt it was a necessary step because accountability, once demonstrated, had to be maintained or it became performative. Eleanor Briggs contacted Stone around this time, inviting him to preview a new installation at the castle, one that focused not on past abuses of power but on the aftermath, the long, uneven process of reckoning, and Stone accepted, curious about how the institution continued to evolve. Walking through the exhibit after hours, Stone was struck by its restraint, the absence of dramatic imagery, the emphasis on testimony, policy changes, and unresolved questions, and he appreciated the choice, recognizing that spectacle could overwhelm substance, and that quiet, when deliberate, could invite deeper engagement. Yet even there, he sensed tension, visitors' comments revealing divergent interpretations, some seeing progress, others seeing deflection, and Stone understood that the castle had become a mirror, reflecting back whatever the viewer brought with them. Outside the castle, however, the quiet took on a different quality when a minor but disturbing incident occurred at a neighborhood mediation center, graffiti appearing overnight that targeted specific individuals by name, accusing them of collaboration, and Stone felt a chill, because personalization marked a dangerous turn, the shift from critique of systems to intimidation of people. The vandalism was quickly cleaned, the incident downplayed publicly, but Stone insisted on a thorough investigation, recognizing that such acts often served as tests, probes to gauge response. Analysis of the language and symbols suggested overlap with the splinter cell previously identified, but with a sharper edge, less ambiguity, and Stone realized that while overt action had diminished, radicalization had not necessarily slowed, it had simply become more focused. He convened a small task group, emphasizing discretion and proportionality, determined to avoid both complacency and overreach, and he instructed them to prioritize understanding networks rather than building cases prematurely, because premature enforcement could fracture fragile alliances with community partners. Conversations with mediators confirmed Stone's concerns, reports of private meetings where rhetoric had grown absolutist, compromise framed as betrayal, and Stone reflected on how moral clarity, when stripped of humility, could become indistinguishable from dogma. Herrera eventually resurfaced, requesting an urgent meeting, and when they sat across from each other once more, Stone sensed the strain immediately, Herrera's confidence replaced by guarded intensity, his words careful but heavy, and he admitted that he was losing influence, that others had begun to operate independently, rejecting his calls for restraint as weakness. Stone listened, resisting the urge to advise too quickly, understanding that this was not merely an operational problem, but a personal reckoning for Herrera, the realization that leadership conferred responsibility without control. Herrera spoke of fear, not of the state, but of irrelevance, of being overtaken by those willing to escalate, and Stone recognized the irony. That fear, the very force the castle symbolized, was now shaping the movement that opposed it. Stone suggested again the importance of public engagement, of reclaiming narrative space before it was monopolized by extremes, but Herrera hesitated, worried that visibility would invite backlash, and Stone countered that silence ceded ground by default. They parted without resolution, and Stone felt the weight of quiet press in once more. Days later, intelligence surfaced indicating that a coordinated action was being planned, not violent but disruptive, targeting multiple sites simultaneously to overwhelm response capacity, and Stone understood the logic, the desire to demonstrate power, without crossing lines that would justify harsh reprisal. He briefed leadership, advocating for a measured response that combined visible readiness with open channels for de-escalation, and preparations were made quietly, avoiding public announcements that might escalate tensions. When the day arrived, the actions unfolded as predicted: sit-ins, blockades, symbolic occupations, and Stone was on the ground, moving between sites, negotiating, listening, reminding participants of boundaries, and while tensions flared, the actions concluded without serious incident, a testament to preparation and restraint. Yet Stone did not feel relief, because he sensed that this was a rehearsal, a demonstration of capacity rather than an endpoint, and the underlying currents remained unresolved. In the aftermath, public discourse intensified, commentators debating whether the actions represented democratic engagement or a threat to order, and Stone observed how quickly narratives polarized, nuance sacrificed for certainty. Within the department, some officers expressed frustration, questioning the value of restraint when disruption persisted, and Stone addressed these concerns directly, emphasizing that legitimacy was not maintained through dominance, but through consistency, that the goal is not to eliminate dissent, but to ensure it did not endanger lives. The quiet that followed was heavier now, charged with expectation, and Stone found himself reflecting on his own limits, the recognition that no amount of vigilance could eliminate risk, that his role was to navigate probabilities rather than certainties. Late one night, unable to sleep, Stone drove aimlessly through the city, passing through neighborhoods both affluent and neglected, seeing how differently the same policies manifested across social lines, and he was reminded that fear was unevenly distributed, that those with the least security felt its weight most acutely. He stopped near the waterfront, watching the lights ripple across dark water, and he thought about how power often operated invisibly, how the absence of overt abuse did not guarantee justice, and how easily quiet could be mistaken for peace. The castle loomed in his thoughts once more, not as a site of terror or reform, but as a reminder that structures, once built, endured beyond the intentions of their creators, and that dismantling fear required more than symbolic gestures. It required sustained attention to the spaces where silence accumulated. Returning home as dawn approached, Stone felt a familiar resolve settle in, tempered by humility, aware that the coming phase would demand patience rather than decisiveness, listening rather than command, and that the most important work often occurred in the intervals between crises. He accepted that fear could not be eradicated, only managed, its energy redirected toward vigilance rather than domination, and as the city slowly woke, Stone prepared himself for the final reckoning, knowing that quiet, when heavy enough, eventually broke, and that how it broke would depend on choices made long before the sound was audible. The break, when it finally came, was neither explosive nor dramatic, but quiet in a way that felt irrevocable, a shift in tone rather than temperature, and Stone sensed it before any formal report reached his desk, the way one senses a change in weather without looking at the sky, through pressure, through instinct sharpened by years of listening to what was not being said. The coordinated actions had subsided, the splinter networks had retreated further into private spaces, and Herrera had stepped back from public leadership entirely, issuing a brief statement announcing his withdrawal in favor of what he called long-term civic work, and Stone understood that this was not surrender but exhaustion, the toll of holding together forces that no longer wanted cohesion. The city responded with a mixture of relief and skepticism, headlines proclaiming a return to calm while opinion pieces warned of unresolved tensions, and Stone found himself agreeing with both, because calm without reconciliation was fragile, yet reconciliation could not be forced without undermining its own premise. Within the department, attention shifted to institutional consolidation, codifying lessons learned, embedding oversight mechanisms into policy rather than personality, and Stone played a central role in these efforts, advocating for changes that would outlast individual leaders because he had seen too many reforms evaporate once their champions moved on. Training curricula were revised, community liaison units expanded, private security oversight formalized, and while none of these measures promised perfection, Stone believed they represented something rarer and more durable, an acknowledgement of fallibility built into structure. The castle itself marked the moment with a modest event, no speeches from politicians, no grand declarations, just an open forum facilitated by mediators where visitors could speak, listen, and leave without consensus, and Stone attended anonymously, sitting among strangers, hearing stories that contradicted one another, without canceling each other out, and he felt a quiet respect for the restraint, the refusal to choreograph closure. Some speakers expressed gratitude, others anger, others confusion, and Stone realized that the castle had finally become what it needed to be, not a monument to fear or reform, but a space that could hold contradiction without collapsing under it. Outside, the city moved on in its uneven way, development continuing, protests recurring at smaller scale, debates shifting focus, and Stone observed how attention migrated, how yesterday's crisis became today's context, and he reminded himself that progress was often invisible in the moment, discernible only in retrospect. Yet not everything resolved cleanly, and Stone was confronted one afternoon with the limits of his influence when a young man arrested for minor vandalism refused mediation, framing any engagement with the system as capitulation, and Stone felt a familiar frustration, the recognition that legitimacy could not be universally conferred, that some would always reject it on principle. He authorized the standard process, fair and proportionate, and accepted that not every outcome could be optimized, that fairness did not guarantee satisfaction. Herrera reached out one final time, not for advice but to say goodbye, explaining that he was leaving the city for a while, stepping away from organizing to study community resilience elsewhere, and Stone wished him well, sensing that while their paths diverged, the exchange itself had mattered, that dialogue, even when inconclusive, left traces. As months passed, the castle faded from headlines, its presence normalized, and Stone found this both comforting and dangerous, because normalization risked complacency, yet he trusted that the structures put in place would provide friction against backsliding. He continued to visit the site occasionally, usually after hours, standing where crowds once gathered, listening to the muted city sounds, and he reflected on how fear had once concentrated there, amplified by secrecy and power, and how its dispersal did not mean elimination but redistribution, woven back into the broader civic fabric where it could be contested rather than imposed. One evening, fog rolled in thick and low, obscuring familiar landmarks, and Stone thought about how the city often revealed itself most honestly when partially hidden, when certainty dissolved into gradients, and he understood that the Castle of Fear had never truly been about a building or even an institution, but about the human tendency to seek control through distance, to mistake authority for safety. The work, he realized, was not to abolish authority, but to anchor it, to bind it to transparency, accountability, and humility, knowing that these anchors required constant maintenance. At the precinct, Stone prepared to transition into a new role, less operational, more advisory, mentoring younger officers, passing on not just procedures but sensibilities, the patience to sit with ambiguity, the discipline to resist both panic and arrogance, and he felt a cautious hope that these lessons would endure, imperfectly but persistently. On his last day in the field before the transition, he walked the streets alone, without radio chatter, without agenda, observing the ordinary life that continued despite, and sometimes because of, the tensions he had spent years navigating, and he felt a quiet gratitude, not for resolution but for continuity. The city had not been healed, but it had not been broken either. And Stone accepted that this was often the best one could hope for, a balance maintained through vigilance rather than certainty. As night fell, he returned home, leaving the fog behind, and he thought about fear one last time, how it could immobilize or illuminate depending on how it was held, and he resolved to remember the castle not as a warning etched in stone, but as a process etched in practice, a reminder that power, when examined, could be shaped, and that the streets of San Francisco, with all their contradictions, would continue to test that shaping long after his own footsteps faded into the city's enduring hum.